Pam Krueger. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. And Pam, first off, I want to say thank you for your time. But before we begin talking about all your successes as a business owner, TV show host, and executive producer, I was kind of hoping we can maybe take a step back and dive into who Pam Krueger is prior to all these accomplishments. What were your origins? What were you like growing up? What was your family ties, if you don't mind sharing?
My gosh. Okay. We'll take a trip in the Wayback Machine. I grew up on Cape Cod. I was actually born on Cape Cod, which not a lot of people are natives of Cape Cod. And I grew up also in New Hampshire, kind of back and forth. So I had like a really idyllic, outdoorsy kind of childhood. Always outdoors, always active, always using our imaginations. Of course, there are no cell phones, no social media, nothing like that. So, you were just left to your own imagination to figure it out. This was, I was the fourth, the youngest. So growing up, everybody was so much older than I am, my siblings, my parents pretty much left me alone. So I really developed, I guess, really early on, I would say, Fernando, that I developed a real imagination and maybe an ability even way back then as a kid to visualize and really, how we talk about manifestation today. This is what you're doing very naturally, when you're a kid and you're hoping, and the hope turns into vision, and the vision turns into decisions, and the decisions turn into actions.
God, that's so fascinating because it seems like you've been able to keep that. You've been able to keep that manifestation energy, um, up to now. Can you share a little bit of how you're able to do that? How were you able to keep that positivity for all your life?
Well, I think you have to screw up a lot in order to learn to trust. For me, in order to learn to trust myself, I had to trust myself when I screwed up. And I had to kind of forgive myself for making mistakes. I was really hard on myself, like a lot of people are. And every time I made a false move and made a mistake, I was really tough on myself. And after a while, I kind of realized that's not getting me anywhere. What it's doing is it's really beating me down. And I think I need to look at, these mistakes that I've made as lessons. And I need to kind of figure out how to tap into what is the right path for me. And when you're young, and you're in school and then you're in college, I went to CU in Boulder, and it's a big school, majored in poli-sci and econ. I loved economics and I knew intuitively that I really liked finance, but isn't it weird? Maybe because I'm a girl, maybe I talked myself out of finance major, but I really enjoyed it. But I'm really lucky, Fernando, because my dad, when I was growing up, he would force us to read the Wall Street Journal. Now, I thought this was normal. So 8th grade, ninth grade, high school, we'd be sitting down somewhere, maybe eating or something, and he would say, "So what did you read about today that was of interest? And tell me about it." And so what happened was I learned about stocks when I was in high school. So by the time I was in college and I was at University of Colorado, I felt like in my I felt like I knew a lot about the way the market worked. And I was surprised that I felt like I was the only one in the class who had any, sort of understanding that came from family. And that's kind of when it dawned on me, how, my God, isn't it weird how we don't learn this in school? We don't have anything to give us the tools that we need to survive in a society that depends entirely 100% on capitalism, free enterprise. And yet we decide to leave that one class out. And this is a class you could introduce in second grade, third grade, fourth grade, so that by the time, you're going off to college, you're not wondering, what's a credit card? You kind of already have it figured out. Anyway, when I was in Boulder, I would say that kind of I lost my way a little bit. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was really confused, and it took me a minute, to kind of figure it out. And then all of a sudden something happened. I got recruited and I got an offer to be a stockbroker because I like stocks and I was investing at a major brokerage firm. And I lit up, like, I was like, oh my God, this is oh, wow. Me? Are you kidding me? This is great. But then I'll tell you how that went.
I did want to ask a couple questions, if you don't mind, about that portion of your life, the childhood and, up to like early college years. You had mentioned, being hard on yourself and a couple of, just like any young adult growing up, I mean, I made tons of mistakes. I mean, we all make mistakes. Would you be able to share one of those maybe mistakes that you've learned from and that, maybe at first it felt like, God, this is so drastic, but then later on realizing that, it was just a learning curve.
Picking the wrong person, relationships,
So,
absolutely stupid, and I'm not saying that the individuals were stupid. I'm saying my choices were really dumb. And it took me in a direction that was just far off my path. And I had to figure out how to get back on the path. But I let myself, I let that happen. I think it was because there was a moment in my life where I really did not know. We all have that. You don't know what you want to do and you don't know what you want. And so you start really testing and experimenting with other people and their dreams. Maybe their dream is my dream. Maybe I want what they want. And then you could waste a little bit of time there figuring out that's not the path. That's not me. And then you kind of dust yourself off and you come back stronger because now you have a much more clear sense that even if I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do during those years, I knew that I had to go in a direction and that direction needed to be one where I could grow into a career that I would enjoy and that I knew that I did enjoy finance. I knew that I enjoyed television too. I wasn't in television way back then, but I remember I took a public speaking class and some of it involved some on-air testing and I really liked it. And I never touched it, never did anything. I don't think I believed in myself enough. I think I thought, oh, well, that's for people who really know what they're doing.
I appreciate you being, just being real and transparent. So thank you for that and having that, that trust. I appreciate you for sharing. And I feel like what you mentioned, I feel like unfortunately a lot of women tend to fall in that situation where, and I don't know what it may be, but I have sisters. I'm one of four. I've seen it where someone may have a potential, female potential, but they meet someone and they kind of set their own needs aside, right? They kind of set their goals or ambitions aside for the one that they've met, and I don't know I don't know what that's about, but the fact that you were able to learn from it, and I'll say this, I wouldn't perhaps maybe not see it as a waste of time because you've learned, right? You grew from it. You learned who you were, right? You discovered what you wanted.
When you're in that moment, and you feel a little bit lost and drifty, you do feel like you're wasting time, but you're not wasting time at all. It's a huge lesson. But you know what? You touched on something that is so subtle and so present, which is when you're a female and you're in your 20s and you're getting from 25 to 30, all during those years, or even just 21 to 28 years, your whole everything in you is telling you, while at the same time I'm pursuing what I want with a career, what about children? What about family? You have this extra layer of, I don't want to say that for me, it wasn't pressure because my parents, thank God, they just didn't push anything. You can't help it. It's sort of, in me, it was sort of innate. I had to always have one eye open for, should I be pursuing a relationship with the idea of settling down and having family at the same time? So you've got all these competing things. I'm really glad you brought that up because I didn't even think about that much in later years, but it really did have a lot to do with, it kind of was woven into the fabric of what was happening in that moment. Decisions that you're making in that moment, you are thinking, I've got these dual goals. One's here, one's here. How do I make it all work? What do I want? I haven't met the right person. What's it all about? And that's what being in your 20s as a female is all about. And when I did get tapped for that stockbroker role at that major brokerage firm, for me to walk into that knowing that I was the only female out of no, there was one other female, but that was in a huge group. It just was just, wow, that gave me a real sense of motivation. And now I know what I want to do and I'm going to do it with a vengeance. Of course, I hated it 6 months later, but was in that moment.
I do appreciate you sharing that because I feel like the new generation tends to speak more about these issues where I feel perhaps the older generation, Gen X and older generations were, I don't want to use the word condition, but we're taught to, don't talk about these things. It's taboo. But now the newer generation, they talk about just about anything and everything that affects their well-being, whether that's mental, physical, emotional, spiritual health, right? Um, and I do feel that it is unfair for women having to decide one or the other, right? Where sometimes they feel like, well, I want this career, but I'm also, from a society standpoint, I'm being pressured to be a mom, be a stay at home mom, and sometimes I feel like it's unfair because it is that extra layer of stress, right?
There's only so much time even in your 20s, there's only so much time in a day. So it's like you're trying to figure out, where do I spend most of my energy and time? And you're developing a career over here, as it happened when I was working at the brokerage firm. And I still over here, of course, wanted to have a relationship that would probably lead to having a family, but it wasn't the overriding goal that made me say, oh, at all expense, I'm going to ditch that career idea and I'm going to focus entirely on this. There's no right or wrong answer here. I didn't do that. I kind of let it play out naturally, and I didn't try to force the relationship side. I just didn't want to force it. I wanted it to be really natural, and if it didn't come along and I didn't meet the father of my future children, then I didn't. And I was focusing on my career. But when you're back in time and you're in that moment, in that day, you only have so many hours of the day, and where are you going to put it? And when you're that young, everything is about proving yourself.
What I love about what you just said is just let it happen. Whatever is meant for you is meant for you. Whatever makes you happy makes you happy. Don't add that extra layer of stress on yourself. At the end of the day, we live our lives and we should only live our lives for us as opposed to for others, right? What others expect from us. We should live for what we expect from us, not from others. And so I love that perspective. And and I feel like that's a healthy way to perhaps tackle this type of situation because you were able to really learn, right? You learn from your college years. And what I love about what you mentioned is your father was a huge influence on you, right? When it comes to your career path. And right.
Yeah.
Can you deep a little bit more into that? Your father's influence, if you don't mind.
Yeah, my dad was just one of those humans who just happened to be. Everybody would describe my dad as tons of integrity and very wise. In fact, I had a friend who, at my dad's funeral, she pulled me aside and she said, "Do you know that your father has more secrets from some of us?" And he was talking about a group of women. He said he carries these secrets, and he was the only person we could turn to who we knew he would never share a secret. I was so proud of him for that. So I guess the way to describe him was that he was just sort of a moral compass and calm, great sense of humor, but he was really calm, and he was very generous with his time and everything. We were close. He was already retired almost by the time I was born, because my parents had me older when they were older. So he was around a lot.
And I'm sure. What was his feelings when you did start this brokerage role?
Both my parents were incredibly proud because they thought what I thought, which was, I'm getting into a career in wealth management, money management, stock brokerage. Back then, kind of represented, you have information and knowledge and expertise that most people do not have, and therefore they are going to seek you out and seek out your brokerage firm for research, for earnings, for things that they can't access by themselves. This is way before the internet, couple of years before the internet. So there was no way for people to come and say, I want to go look at Yahoo Finance and see how Yahoo's earnings are doing today, or, name a company, Apple, whatever. They couldn't do that. So we held all that information. And so there was a lot of prestige, and there was a lot of it was really a lot of responsibility, and I loved the idea that I would be helping people, I'd be advising, and that I would be helping them manage, and in some cases, I would be managing their portfolios. That was thrilling to me. So, yeah, my parents were like, "Yeah, go, go." And then within 6 months, it was like, wow, I really learned, how different it really was inside that environment. And then that changed my whole life.
Can you perhaps provide us maybe a little bit more insight as to what changed from being excited to, hey, this is my first corporate type of role from Colorado University, and then to 6 months later, like, oh, you know what, maybe not, it may not be for me, if you don't mind.
So the aha moment was, how everybody in life, there's a fork in the road at some point. Now you may not even really, it may not come back to you as like a one particular fork. Maybe you had several forks. Maybe it was a wedding proposal. The day that you said yes, that changed the trajectory of your life, right? It could be a career and that changed the trajectory. You might have several little fork in the roads, right? Well, I had a big one, like huge, the biggest one ever. And this was when I was just so hopeful, kind of coming in as a rookie broker. And then within 6 months, and I was 24, 25 years old, within 6 months, I realized that I had not been hired to advise. I had not been hired to offer, wealth management and become a portfolio manager, et cetera. I was hired for one reason: call friends and family, open accounts as fast as you can, sell them annuities, sell them whatever. Here's the mutual fund of the day. This is what you're going to do. And I, all of the training that you have for the Series 7 to take that exam, all of that ended that day that you are thrown onto the sales floor. And that's when I realized the epiphany was, holy cow, Pam, this is not an advice model. This is a sales and marketing model. Is it bad? Is it wrong? No, I'm not saying it's wrong, but is it for me? I thought this was going to be more advice and wealth management. It's not. So I said to myself, okay, what do I want to do? Okay, I don't think I want to do this. I think I want to get more in advice and more in portfolio management, which means I have to leave this brand new position that I was in after like 6 months, almost a year. I did everything I could to get fired. I thought if I got fired, maybe I go to law school. I just didn't, I wanted to collect unemployment. So if I got fired, I could collect unemployment. So I did everything I could to get fired. I was as unproductive. I was a slug. I didn't do anything. I didn't get fired. I got promoted. When I got
Say,
promoted, then eventually I moved firms and I moved to Northern California and I was managing 60 brokers. These are nice people. These are like nice guys, all guys. Most of whom are twice my age. Now I'm like 26. I'm a vice president and I'm making good money. But here comes the fork in the road. Two of the brokers that I was managing, and it was like a big cadre of brokers, like, you can imagine what that was like, kind of like babysitting. Two of them were openly targeting cognitively impaired elderly people to sell them annuities inside their IRA accounts. So, fork in the road. I had to stop and say, okay, Pam, you can continue to defend this practice, this behavior, and you'll probably get promoted and promoted and promoted because you're doing a really good job. And I'll keep making more money. I'll be able to buy my second home at that point, and I could just go la 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 la. I don't hear what they're doing. I don't see what they're doing. I didn't know that. I could try to whitewash it, do whatever I want. I said, absolutely fork in the road time. If I leave, and I'm so young, I'm leaving with nothing. I'm just gonna have to leave. I'm gonna have to resign. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? So that fork in the road happened and it was a clear decision. So I said, I don't care what happens. I don't care where I land. I'm going to land someplace. I'm going to be okay. I can't do this. I can't do this. I can't defend it. It's malpractice. If it were law, it would be malpractice. If it were medicine, it would be malpractice. But financial services is an industry based on sales, not advice. So I said, I want to go where the advice is. So I left and I never came back and I never went back. And it really, frankly, it set the tone for the whole trajectory of every decision that I made from then on out, which was completely in keeping with who I am as a person so I didn't feel lost. I really had a lot of faith that I'd be okay because I didn't feel lost.
You mentioned about your father having a strong moral compass. I can just hear it in your voice. That story, I hear it. So thank you for sharing that. That was eye-opening, but I will say maybe we should just take a step back though. Um, and maybe we shouldn't overlook the fact that you're brilliant. At 20 something, you're VP already. Maybe we shouldn't overlook that you must have had a strong work ethic. The all of the years up to college, your father's influence in teaching you how to read the Wall Street Journal and the stocks. I mean, all of that showed up in your first real corporate job. I mean, how that is not common for, and let's just be honest, from in that era, right? A female, a young female, straight out of college, being now a VP and overseeing individuals that are twice her age, like that's an accomplishment of itself. Removing just removing the dilemma, right, with the annuities and things of that nature. But you should be proud of yourself in that you you really did a lot in that short amount of time. You really were able to um just advance so quickly. Just curious, how did you do that? That portion, of time.
If I want to pretend that um, uh, it had nothing to do with the fact that affirmative action played a role, I'd be kidding myself. Let's face it, I'm a female. I'm coming along at the right time in the 80s, and they needed females. So was it me being brilliant, or was it them needing a female? A combination,
Could be both.
some kind of combination there. And if I'm being brutally honest,
Absolutely. And and if you don't mind me asking, were most of your clients male? If you don't mind me asking, at that time, were they the target group?
definitely.
So I would say I think it's easier for and again, I'm not taking anything away from you because you clearly put in the time. But I think it's easier for a female to be able to sail and make a man's walls come down than another male.
I didn't want that to be my career. I didn't want to sell people anything. I just wanted to get more experience with advice and learn from the best. And, doesn't mean I wanted to be a geeky portfolio manager and I love interfacing with people, but it was the advice component that I found to be so appealing about the career. You're helping somebody, you're helping a family change what they're doing early enough, or even if it's late and you're catching it, you're helping them with what they're struggling with. And that was what was appealing to me. I couldn't do that in the sales environment because the pressure was to make a sale versus please provide great advice and get paid for it.
How did, because besides, so there's, you can perform well, but still be under pressure. How did you deal with that pressure in that sales environment? And more specifically, the time where you moved up to VP, how did you deal with that stress, that quota stress that I'm sure you had to achieve every month?
Well, like I said, when it was on me, when I was in the role of sales rep, which is stockbroker was now they call it advisor at a brokerage firm. But, back then it was you are a stockbroker. So because I didn't want to do that and I wanted to get fired and I didn't get fired and then I got promoted. Then once I was in that role, oh my God, it was easy because they did all the work. All my brokers did all the work. All my reps did all the work. I was paid an override on what they did. And my job was to babysit and make sure that they didn't, go over the boundaries. And they crossed those boundaries left and right. And then finally, with that one instance where I saw them, really hitting up cognitively impaired elder, I said,
Mhm.
that is not going to happen on my watch. I'm not going to
Mhm.
touch it. It stinks. It smells bad. I'm out of here.
How did that play out? Like, what you up to this point? This is your first real corporate
Yeah,
position.
my parents weren't really happy.
How was that conversation with your father, your mother, if you don't mind me asking?
Conversation with my dad was he understood completely. Conversation with my mom, not so much. What? Out of like, you're making a mistake. You're making a mistake. Why are you doing this? A lot of people said that to me. And anyway, you just have to just say, That's okay. I've seen how the sausages are made, and I'm not gonna eat one now, so I'm gonna go over here.
There's something to admire about that because that shows your resiliency, your confidence in you, and that kind of reverts back to basically when you were born, you had that imagination and you already knew I can manifest anything. Maybe at that moment you weren't, maybe you didn't think about that moment. You were just like, I need to go. But your subconscious, you knew you can create things regardless of the situation, which is just amazing.
Because there's a need, there's a real need for it. So I don't think I'd be good at manifesting unless I saw with my own eyes. The people who came to the brokerage firm, I listened to what they were looking for. And I heard them. They were looking for advice. And they weren't looking for like the hot stock tip of the day, but they wound up at the brokerage firm, which wanted to sell them the hot stock of tip of the day. And listening to them, I thought, this is just a mismatch here. This one wants advice. This one wants to, no one's going to be, the client's not going to end up being happy. So I guess what I'm saying about the faith is that is when there is a need for something and it's a real need. You really see it. You're not making it up. It's there. And it's the right path. Then you're just going to have that faith and that confidence because it's the right thing to do.
I love it. Um, how did you transition from that moment to, I mean, going from finance to television? Like, how did that enter your
Isn't that
life?
weird? So isn't that weird? Because I thought back on when I was in college and I thought, remember how much I loved doing that television class that we had, that's public speaking. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. So what happened was I was so lucky. I was kind of involved in the fee only fiduciary channel. And I worked then at Schwab. And Schwab was building what became its multi-billion-dollar RIA custodial platform. And I was involved in the very beginning when it was like a startup. It was so much
Mm,
fun. And then we got it to a point where we crossed the billion in assets under management. And it kind of stopped being fun. It kind of started being a lot more like a corporate job. Like we're Friday, we're going to have a meeting about the meeting that we're going to have in April. And I'm ADHD, right? So I'd sit in these meetings and I'm looking out the window and I'm like, I can't do that. My brain doesn't. So then I started daydreaming about, something else I wanted to do. So I started getting these invitations to do these little guest appearances on TV shows to talk about, you know, bonds and stocks and talk about interest rates and bonds and the inverse relationship between bonds and interest rates. And so I'd take like a topic that seemed kind of complex and I'd turn it into a little Mr. Science minute. And I was doing this on TV and then I got an
mm,
offer and then I started working at KGO in San Francisco. I'm still friends with everybody, like not everybody, but still friends today, still working with someone who I worked with at Channel 7. I still know people from back in the brokerage days. So, you kind of carry people with you forever. And so when I got into the television side of it, it was to educate and it was more personal finance. So I got offered a job at a major network as to be a business reporter. And I was like, oh my God, how cool is this? But then I realized, oh my goodness, they want me to read a teleprompter with
mm,
other people's words. The market went up today. The market went down. The market went up. Market went down. Market went up. Market went down. And I'm thinking, that's a little bit inane. It doesn't teach it.
mm,
It's like a parrot could do that. But I just didn't want to do that. So I said, okay, I want to create a segment or create a show that's going to educate the public. So Tech TV at that time was
mm,
ZDTV. What a blast. So I did a show every day live. I was recruited. I did a show every day live called The Money Machine. Carmine
mm,
Gallo and I were co-hosting. It was a blast. And then from there, I decided I wanted my own TV series because I learned enough about the questions that the public was asking, the audience is asking. And I thought I can turn that into real stories of real people. And I'll have John Bogle and I'll have Warren Buffett and I'll have Jeremy Siegel and I'll have Nassim Taleb and I'll have all these like really big people. And I had this in my head. Now it's like, well, how am I gonna pull that off? So I was still, working and But then I had a period where I left Schwab because, we did really well. So now I'm in I'm just turning 30 at that point. And I'm like, okay, I can take this risk. How am I going to pull this off? So then by the time I was about 35, I had started I partnered up with state securities regulators, and I asked for a grant, a big one, to cover a season of a show that I had in my head called Money Track. Okay. They looked at me like I was nuts. Like, but what show? This Money Track series, every week you see it on Sundays with John Bogle and Ben Stein and all these people. It doesn't exist, Pam. How can we fund it? I'm like, well, hang on a second. I think we can make it exist. So I ran over to the PBS APT distribution and I said, if I had a show that was all produced, would you air it? And they said, we have to test it. So long story short, went back to the regulators, got just enough funding to do a test called a pilot. Did the pilot, brought it back over to PBS folks, public television. What do you think? He said, yeah, we like it. Went back to the regulators and I said, can you write me a check now? Because I want to get this puppy going. The expectation was that we would call it a success if enough stations would air it. 60 stations had to agree to air this series. Didn't matter the size. It did kind of matter the size, but for all intents and purposes, 60 stations needed to say, for us internally, for the funding, the Investor Protection Trust, to say, yeah, we want to continue to fund this. It makes sense. So we wound up on 255 stations. And we had 3 seasons. Ben Stein was a regular. Warren Buffett was on the show. John Bogle was a semi-regular. And that vision that I had, and I had a co-host who was a comedian because I wanted this to be down to earth. My dog was on the show. So Money Track ran for years, season after season, usually Sunday mornings. It was a blast. It was so much fun.
Wow. You know what I love about that whole story is that, and again, just from what I can hear, you just knew it was going to work. Now, maybe I'm sure there were moments, right, where the funding situation came in. You're like, you doubted, but that didn't stop you though, because you still kept going. You could have easily been like,
It was try years. There were like literally all those moments added up to a couple of years of uncertainty.
but your mind wasn't affected. You kept going. And I feel like that right there is what makes an outlier, an individual that just continues to progress and relentless.
Relentless.
Love it. And I think a lot of leaders, unfortunately, or maybe not leaders, but a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs, professionals tend to, they get discouraged when there's one fork in the road, when that's just life. Like there's always going to be forks in the road and you just got to accept that's just life and accept that, in order to go to the next route, you just got to do a detour. Um, wow. Okay. And so, and then also let's not overlook that you're 30 at this point, and then
Then I'm
35.
then I'm like 35 and then I'm 40 because it took us, even though we produced 3 seasons, that was over like 6, 7 years.
And would you be able to perhaps share just a little bit of behind the scenes of what it takes or what it took to create an episode?
Yeah, actually, probably like a typical episode is probably a good one. I would sit down with Neil. I hired this fantastic show producer whose background he had just come from CNN. And together we would sit down and we had 40 people, most of whom were freelancers on the team, shooting, editing, reporting, and all of that. But where it started, the genesis of each episode started, we would sit at the cafe in Tiburon where I lived, and we would sit down with these placemats. You know, those white placemats, you're sitting down with the kids have the crayons.
Mhm.
We took the crayons and we'd say, okay, we've got a whole season. We just finished season 1. We're coming up on season 2. We have to figure out the overarching theme of what we want for each 30-minute episode, what real people stories we want to populate, what experts are going to be the best experts to speak to those real people. How do we want to, basically we had a template, and then we would have to just use our imaginations and think about what lessons do we want to talk about this week? Is it going to be lessons for parents to help their kids? Is it going to be lessons for younger people? Is it going to be lessons for people who retired or are about to retire? Is it startups? Is it real estate? But I always wanted to use real people and their story and what they were doing right and what they were doing wrong. And the whole purpose of every single episode was we had to have the payoff at the end. Why did I watch this? What the heck did I get out of this? That payoff has to be there. So Neil and I would look at each other. This is a process. And we'd sit down and go, what's the payoff? What's the payoff? We'd say that all the time and we'd push each other to make sure that every episode had a really easy but very important lesson that you walk away about investing, saving, managing money. And that was the whole intent of the show. So it was that the process was getting people all organized out in the field. So if we're shooting a story in Indiana, then we have to have a crew go to Indiana. And if we're shooting in LA, you've got to have a crew in LA. And then back then it was not quite as easy as it is now because things weren't digitized as much. Sort of semi-digitized. So that whole process, you're working with a team to get exactly what you want. And by the time you're editing that show, and that what's the payoff had to be a driver of every episode. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of work and a lot of running around, and it was a blast.
It's amazing. How did this impact you in your life? Because clearly you're very much still in this amazing transition, right? You had this great finance career, and then you transition. You're fairly new to being a you know and maybe I might be saying this wrong, but like a full time TV show host slash producer. How did that impact your personal life? That the scheduling, the designing the new seasons, the traveling.
I guess the best way to say that is that, I did not have a family. I have nieces and nephews, but I did not, wind up, getting married, having a family. So my family and my social life was kind of wrapped up in my team. So I had someone who traveled with me everywhere. We would, go to New York a lot because I would be doing appearances, on other people's shows and so forth. And it was a blast. And so they became my family. So my personal life was and my social life was very much tied to, and this happens a lot with anybody at work.
Absolutely.
Your work is really intense and
Absolutely.
got to be in contact with each other all the time. So then you wind up going out after and, having drinks and getting to know, and get to know their families. And, so that was it pulled me we were really tight. We still are, with a few of the people.
I appreciate you sharing that because that's as raw, as honest, as authentic it's gonna get, in the sense that when you really want something, you go all in, full throttle, or else you kind of half-ass it. And clearly you have an amazing career. And I feel like, and again, don't get me wrong, right? And each generation has a different mindset and things of that nature. But I feel like it's somewhat of a lost, I don't know if it's an art or just a mind shift, but I do feel like, there's kind of a current struggle, right? Where you want to achieve your goals, but you also want to be off the clock at 4:30 and, have this work-life balance. And I think work-life balance is great, but I think sometimes and especially for younger aspiring leaders, they kind of forget that you got to put in the grind and you got to put in those extra hours to reach that level. If not, where's that room for growth if you're just putting the bare minimum?
It's a good way to say it because it's Neil, who was my show producer. He always used to say, it's like taking coal and compressing it, and you're not going to get a diamond unless you compress the coal. You can't have that both ways. And so it's just a personal decision as to how much pressure you want to apply to your dream, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. And if you don't apply the pressure, it doesn't mean that some of your dream isn't going to be realized. It just might not end up being a diamond.
Absolutely, 100% accurate with what you just said. My whole life has been aligned with that as well. And, you're talking about, prior to us recording, you were kind enough to, show interest and ask, what I wanted to do with this hobby of mine, this podcast that I have. And, to your point, to do these interviews, it takes time in addition to my very demanding current role, my quote 9 to 5. But it's that pressure, right? Where I know that I have this goal, but I'm going to make it to the best diamond that I can. I just got to wait a couple more years, just a couple more years. And I know the payoff will be there. And so that really aligns with kind of how you've really prioritize your life where you knew what you wanted. You're like, there's going to be some sacrifices, but this is who I am. This is what I want. And, you're a testament to that.
Thank you for saying that. It's good, in your case, like at this point, to be able to just sort of see the vision, see it as clearly as you can of what the end game is with your pursuits. Where are you putting your energy? What do I want where do I want it to land? What do I want it to look like? What's the actual output? What's the desired result actually look like?
Absolutely. And, you know, if you don't mind me asking, during this, and I'm sure it was a rush. You're meeting creative individuals, Warren Buffett, like you're meeting all these amazing individuals.
Pinch me. It was literally a pinch me. Yes.
Can you describe those seasons, that point in your life? Like, did you feel most alive? Like, what was your feelings? Did you have adrenaline? Did you feel like you were on cloud nine?
It was exhilarating, and it was exhilarating to the point where, it's almost like the work that I put in blindly, blind faith, call it irrational faith that I had when I was raising the funds and trying to explain money track when it was all in my head. And that was a period of time that it took. Now, come out the other side of it, the yin and the yang, right? Now you got the high. It actually happened. You pushed, you pressured, you made a diamond, you put that pressure. So now the payback is that you better enjoy the ride because this is exhilarating. It was exhilarating and I knew it in the moment. I knew it in the moment. I would look at Katie or Neil and I would say, this is what we're doing is just, it's so much fun. It's actually contributing in an educational way, in a meaningful way. I won 2 Gracie Awards.
It's
That
great.
as spending the day, half a day with Warren Buffett in Omaha. I mean, the pinch me factor. I was acutely aware of how fortunate I was, and acutely aware of how the tears and the blood and the sweat. I mean, all that misery that I went through. That was tough that how this is the yin and the yang. And that's just all there is to it. It's just that hard work yielded this high. And that was a real high. And now what I'm doing today is sort of is an evolution of the whole thing as well.
I love it. Would you be okay with maybe sharing something that shocked you about the television industry?
I think that because I was on the periphery, Fernando, I wasn't in that part of the industry where I wasn't an actor. I wasn't involved in that part of the world. This is educational. This was
Mhm.
my production. So because I was overseeing it, I probably didn't have to encounter a lot of what people, women, and whatever. I really I didn't swim in that lane. I was in my very own individual lane that happened to be on television versus being in the television business, if you will. But yeah, oh yeah. I mean, like sometimes I would go to back then there was this big conference, this big convention. It was always in New Orleans. It would always be in Miami. It's a place like really fun or Vegas. And it was all the major TV shows were there. Oprah, everything was there. Warner Brothers, they all had booths and you'd be walking around and you just like celebrities are walking by and all that. They're all trying to pitch the shows and they're there to help the producers pitch the shows. So, I mean, that was surreal. That was surreal walking around in that environment. And here I am, Pam Krueger, producer and host and co-host of Money Track. And like, what? It's not quite as exciting, as, you know, Ellen DeGeneres.
Plus the fact that you're in the same area where you can sniff
Right,
Oprah's perfume. I mean, that's
right,
amazing. You know, I mean, you feel
right.
the energy. Uh,
Right, right. Yeah, that's the closest that I would get to industry events. And going out to dinners, I always got invited out. I was like an orphan because I was there by myself. So I would always get invited out with other people. Oh my God, it was a blast.
Regardless if it wasn't perhaps like a Ellen DeGeneres show or things like, I mean, at the end of the day, you were still on television continuously Sundays, right?
Very much.
There must have been moments where people recognize you on the street. And I'm just curious, what is that transition from being a, corporate person, professional, to, to now you're this PBS television show personality in the mornings? Like, how was that transition? Was it weird? How did you deal with people recognizing you in the streets? And how did you deal with that?
It was fun. I felt like I am the belle of a very small ball. No, seriously, it was so much fun because people in my hometown, this was especially fun. Walk into the local bistro, right? And there's everybody's at the bar and stuff. And I saw, like, they didn't know that I was doing the show, and they live right down the street from me. I saw you on this show. My God, or whatever. Or you're going down the street and somebody will say something to do with, "Hey, Mr. Earl, that Earl parking lot attendant, I watched that. I saw that," and people will say things every now and again. That was really fun. It was fun. I just kind of assumed nobody knows, anything. And if they've seen the show and they've seen me, everybody sees so many people on the air all the time. They're probably like, a lot of times people would say, "You look so familiar." God, trying to remember where I saw you. And I'd be like, I, I actually host a show called Money Trap. Oh yeah. I didn't actually watch the show, but I remember seeing you. Yeah. So it was fun. It was really fun.
I love it. So, you've had so many transitions from, growing up as, the youngest child and having this amazing father and mother just, teaching you just life lessons before you're even an adult to, I mean, doing just having s- huge success in your 20s and then transitioning to a very successful, PPS, money educational show in your 30s. What made you wanna transition, maybe not, what made you wanna transition from television to where you're at now, being the CEO of WealthRamp?
It was really easy. It was a viewer. It was a lot of viewers who were emailing me and they were saying, "Pam, so frustrated." Or I'd do a speaking engagement in person and I'd have people in the audience always there. "Pam, on your show, you're always telling us how careful we have to be, how wary we have to be, how thoughtful we have to be about hiring a financial advisor. But we don't know where to go. And if we go online and we fill out those forms, then they take the information, and the next thing I know, my inbox is cluttered and my spam phone calls are coming in from insurance companies trying to make appointments to sell me annuities. I don't want to go down that road. I can't just go to the CFP and look online. I can't go to a brokerage firm because I want advice. I don't want recommendations. I want actual financial planning and tax planning. Where do I go? Can't you please share the names of the advisors who over the years and you have vetted? And my first reaction was, that's something that I'm never going to do that. I don't even like this industry. That's the last thing I'm going to do. Until fork in the road moment, this woman said to me, "I feel like you're kind of taking us in the car all the way to the hotel. And then when we pull up in front, you're opening the door and kicking me to the curb because you're telling us how to vet advisors and you're telling us what to watch out for and you're telling us what not to do with financial advisors. We want a financial advisor, Pam, and we don't know where to find them. And I feel like you're kicking me to the curb." And I went, "Oh my God, you know what? She's right." Because if she's telling me that there's nothing out there, and I've had a zillion people telling me there's nothing out there that's helping them find an advisor, then what is wrong with me? Am I not listening to that? So I called Jean Chatzky, who I knew, and I said, Jean, actually, it was Terry Savage. I called Terry first. I met with Terry in Chicago. I said, Terry, are you getting a lot of viewers who are asking you? Yeah, 'cause she's on the air on WGN and on the radio, been written many best-selling books on retirement. Are you getting a lot of viewers asking you for advisors? She's like, Pam, it's like the number one question I get. And then I went to Jean Chatzky, who was on the Today Show as a regular money editor. And I said, are you getting a lot of people asking you? Oh my God, it's the number one. Then I talked to Kathy, Susie Orman's wife, and I asked her if this is a problem, and everybody agreed. And I said, well, we got to do something here because it's true what this woman is saying. There's no place for people to go to find already pre-vetted advisors who are going to fit their financial situation. So that's how it all happened. It was because of that woman saying that she felt that she was getting kicked to the curb. And it was my wake up moment. Like, hey, dum-dum, when someone's telling you that there's a problem and there's no solution in the marketplace for it, then maybe you ought to do something about it. So everything I did through the show, Fernanda, was through my nonprofit. But I decided to launch WealthRamp. 2017, I started working on the algorithm. 18, I started working on finding at least 200 advisors that I would be able to vet. It took me over a year to vet and interview every single advisor, because after all, if I'm going to make a recommendation for you to see a financial advisor, then you might as well be coming to me. It's a reflection on me. My name is on that. So I have to
Mhm,
do very, very, very careful vetting, and I know what I'm looking for.
mhm,
So once I had the network established, I rolled out to the public in 2019 to the consumer directly. And uh, we are not out there selling people's profile information. And I insisted I want to be the one and only who does not allow, when someone does come to me, and I do make referrals, 3 advisors who fit your situation out of the 230 advisors we have. I want you to be the one to reach out to them. So it's a one-way mirror. I designed it so it's a one-way mirror. You can see them, the advisors, but they cannot see you. They cannot contact you.
mhm,
That means you have all the power. You have all the control. If you want to look at the advisor's SEC records, they're right there. If you want to reach out and book a free consultation to get to know you, etc., that's up to you. And so by setting it up that way, I knew that I was meeting the needs of the consumer. And now we're profitable. We've been doing this since 2019. And now I'm working with retirement plans
mm,
to provide bespoke, completely independent of brokerage firms and sales, bespoke advice in the workplace adjacent to the 401k, so that employees know that they are not wholly dependent on the recommendations in the 401k from the people running the 401k, who are very well intentioned, but they are fiduciaries to the plan. They're not fiduciaries to the employee. I am like, best way I'd like to describe it is visually. If you're in a building and you're working for a big company in a 401k, and you have multiple people in your 401k, you can pick up the phone and call. You have financial wellness. You can pick up the phone and call. But what you
mhm,
don't have is personalized advice for you and your husband, you and your wife, outside of work that's private. So I want you to look out the window of the building that you're in, and I want you to see a food truck in the parking lot called WealthRamp. And it's 230 advisors, 3 of whom I will recommend to you, only if you want an advisor, because you have to hire the advisor. It's not free. It's not a free benefit. The access to the advisors and the process of helping you find the right advisor is WealthRamp. That I'm a trusted resource for the employer who's sponsoring the plan. But we want that individual to reach out,
mhm.
and they know, well, if I want my own advisor who's fiduciary only to me and works only for me, then yeah, you have to hire them.
Absolutely. No, that's great, and I love that idea, but I'm curious though, because that's a lot of work, especially a whole year of vetting. How did you, um, what was the process? Well, first off, what was the process of even getting 200 plus advisors? How did you get their buy-in into this whole network, if you don't mind sharing?
It was a matter of me just reaching out to the advisors I already knew. And then through my own circle of advisors and knowing that, okay, the world, it consists of, call it 500,000 financial advisors in the US, right? That includes insurance agents. That includes
Mm, mm,
brokers, like I used to
mm,
be, when I was at the
mhm,
brokers. And it includes fee-only fiduciary advisors. And so if you divide that and you say, well, how many are actually independent, fee-only, call it 60,000. Now, out of that 60,000 cadre of fee-only fiduciary advisors, how are you supposed to know which ones are outstanding and exceptional, which ones are mediocre, and which ones are dangerous? Because not every fee-only fiduciary advisor is going to be excellent. They're not all going to be exceptional. So I had to go to the ones who I knew from my background and start there. And then once I explained it, and I would call and I would say, Fernando, listen, I'm going to start this service. Would you like to be part of the beta? And then they wanted to be on the mission because they knew it was education driven. So I want to teach employees, I want to teach people about how do advisors operate? How do they get paid? How do you, as an individual consumer, get your money's worth working with an advisor? Now, this is stuff I covered on Money Track. The Money Track wasn't all about getting a financial advisor.
mm.
This is solving a niche problem that a lot of people have especially when they're getting closer to retirement and they don't know where to go. So I want to be their trusted resource for financial advisors, whether they're doing it on their own independently or whether they're at work and they see line of sight food truck in the parking lot and they want to take advantage and tap into WealthRamp through their employer or through their financial wellness provider.
Think there's so many lessons in just that process alone that a lot of entrepreneurs and aspiring leaders and sales folks and consultants and really anyone just living life can take. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to vet, right? And don't be afraid to just be out there. And you clearly, that's been your theme from day one, the moment you were born to now, where you just been authentically yourself. You set a goal, you get after it, and you're just living your true, authentic self. And I can definitely admire that. I did want to ask though, because you have so many accolades and achievements, what is your end game with WealthRamp, if you don't mind me asking?
I really would like to as I see retirement plans being so important and central to people's lives, that's where most people end up accumulating the bulk of their wealth, right? Through their deferred compensation plan. And so what I feel they deserve and what I feel they need is that opportunity to tap into independent, objective fiduciary advice that's fee only. I'm not saying they need to. I'm saying that if they decide they want help, I want that option to be there because it's not there right now. So the end game is I would like to see every retirement plan across America decide for itself that they can't have the plan without having WealthRamp in the parking lot as the food truck. Because you can have the cafeteria and the free food, and it's a wonderful grilled cheese sandwich with tomato soup. Okay. But if you want something, you want Mexican, you want something that is like, you know, organic, you got to pay for it. But we've got the food truck there because we want you, the employee, to not feel stuck. And we don't want you to feel that you only have one place to turn to. And financial wellness has filled so much of the void for people who are looking for guidance and education and financial literacy missing. And why I'm partnering with financial wellness platforms is because they need to also, or they want to also expand and be able to have the capability to also offer bespoke private advice, actual financial advice, where the employee has an advisor they hire. That advisor is fiduciary only to them. So it's a resource. And that's my end game. Every plan in America, I don't say it should be mandated and required by the government, but what I would like to see, or the Department of Labor, what I'd like to see is that across the board companies say this is a really practical way to help our employees because we've got private equity and we've got annuities and we are asking employees to make more complex decisions about the investments inside the 401k. And it's not fit to do that without offering independent, objective advice because that employee who might be married don't forget your 401k, your spouse has a 401k too. And if you're getting pitched and recommended all these investments inside your 401k and you're not coordinating with your spouse and your real estate and your kids and your needs, then you're in your taxes. And so that's where I want, look, if 401ks are going to become fancy schmancy, which is fantastic, then you better have a resource where they can tap into expertise that can really give them an objective advice and guidance on whether that makes sense for them. And that requires an advisor who is 100% fee-only fiduciary in order to get that. So that's my end game. I want to be part of every 401k, 403b plan across America.
I wouldn't be surprised that this becomes a manifestation, turn into reality soon.
I see it enough. And then you know what? We don't have to stop here. Why not go interplanetary?
I just love your energy. We need more of this. Pam, one last question, if you don't mind, before we wrap up this interview, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
You know, as an accomplished human being, what advice would you give to future leaders?
The best advice I can possibly think of is please don't ever forget that every mistake, especially if you've got kids, every mistake you've made with money or any mistake that you've made along the way, use that, as a springboard to help form what you do next. And, don't be ashamed of it. Don't hide it. Just be able to like really be fully accountable in a way that you're looking at it completely objectively. Try to find a mentor if you can, if that can exist. Try to find someone who is in a position where they can offer something and simply ask them. Just ask them. They want to help you. So if you're younger, you're definitely, mentorship is more common now than it used to be. But that's something that I think is really important. Just ask for help along the way and treat every single stupid mistake that you've made as a wonderful, really eye-opening, great experience. I mean, we hear that a lot, but that's because it's true. It is true.
Pam Krueger, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining our podcast.
Thank you for having me.